So on my channel I talk about a lot of Nintendo series over the years, whether it's Mario, Pokemon, Pikmin, Kirby, or the other games like Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, or Metroid. But there is one game series I have yet to talk about on this channel, and it's one of the biggest and most grand Nintendo series of all time, The Legend of Zelda. There has been so many Zelda games over the years, so it's kind of hard to choose, and honestly the reason why it took me so long to make a video on Zelda is because it's a big game to talk about. And I thought since I've been making videos on YouTube for a few years now, I thought it would be a good time to finally talk about Zelda, with one of the first ever Zelda games I've ever played, which happens to be The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Now, Zelda Ocarina of Time is the definition of a classic Nintendo game. If you could think of one of the most impactful games around the time, it has to be this game in particular. In fact, if I remember correctly, Zelda Ocarina of Time is literally the highest rated video game of all time, period. And even to this day, this game is still a cult classic for a lot of people. This and Mario 64 pretty much made the N64 for a lot of people. I remember playing this years ago when I was little, playing on the Wii, and I honestly had a hard time playing through it, but once I got into the 3DS remake, that was actually the first time I've ever beaten a Zelda game. However, as the years go by and pessimism kind of showed up on the internet saying like, this game is outdated and such, I thought why not to give it another shot to play Zelda's first ever 3D game. But with everything out of the way, let's get started. So the game starts in a small village in the Korok Forest filled with the Kokori kids. These people in particular are known to have companions that are fairies, but as for the main character in the game, this is Link, and he is known for not having a fairy companion. Lately, he has been having severe nightmares of this mysterious horseman attacking him. The Great Deku Tree has sensed something in peril, so he sends a fairy to send the boy to him because he is the chosen one. After a search of finding a sword and shield, he then finds the Great Tree, where he explains that the world is in great peril and he is in great danger. After Link explores inside the tree and slays a giant monster, it's revealed that he was poisoned and is going to die. With his final few words, he explains that Link is the chosen one and needs to go to Hyrule Castle to meet Zelda. And just like that, the Great Deku Tree has perished. With no time to spare, Link heads out to Hyrule Castle, but before he do so, he meets with his childhood friend, Saria. She understands that Link needs to go on a big quest, but before he leaves, she gives him her ocarina as a souvenir, which is going to be an important key point of this game, both for the story and gameplay. After traveling through the Hyrule Fields and fending off skeletons, he then reached to Hyrule Castle, where he meets Zelda and explains what's going on. An evil king named Ganondorf is planning to seize the Temple of Time to seal the Triforce, a powerful artifact that can turn Ganondorf into a literal god. So the plan is that Link needs to go find the spiritual stones and get the Master Sword and the Triforce before Ganon does. Link already has one of them thanks to the Great Deku Tree, but he needs to find one with the Gorons and the Zoras. After one trip up to the Gorons and fighting this giant rock monster, he then heads to the Zora where he gets eaten by a giant fish to rescue the princess of the Zoras. After getting all the spiritual stones and getting a fiancé for Link, he then sends to Hyrule Castle, but before he do so, Ganondorf infiltrates Hyrule Castle and is trying to steal the Ocarina of Time. Zelda, with her assistant Impa, then runs off with a horse, trying to get away from Ganondorf. He then gets very frustrated when he lost the track of Zelda and Impa, and then demands Link to find out where they went. Link refuses and holds out a sword against Ganondorf. All he does is scoff at him, but does respect him for having the guts to face off of him. However, the battle didn't last long, as Ganondorf shoots him with a warning shot, knocking him out. With no time to lose, Link retrieves the Ocarina of Time and heads to the Temple of Time where he pulls out the Master Sword. However, it turns out that Ganondorf was watching them the entire time, and this was his plan all along, to wait for him to retrieve the Master Sword so he can steal the Triforce. And to make things worse, Link was sent into a 7-year coma because he was not old enough to become the Chosen One. And just like that, Link is now a young adult. The sage then explains that ever since he was in the coma, Ganondorf took over Hyrule and chaos pursues. The Zoras are frozen in ice, the Gorons were captured and locked up, assholes taken over the Lon Lon Ranch, and even Link's childhood village has been taken over by monsters around the forest. So yeah, Link has a lot of things to do to save Hyrule from Ganondorf. But he's not going at it alone, as Sheik, a mysterious ninja from the Sheikah clan, has arrived to help Link. What he does is pretty much help guide Link to find the secret medallions, but also teach him to find certain songs that can warp him to temples easily. So yeah, that's pretty much the story for Zelda, and overall, it's honestly a really cool, adventurous story I really like. It may be a bit straightforward, but honestly it doesn't really matter because the adventure just feels very grand. And the amount of variety of areas you need to save really feels like you're going on a big quest to save the world. This definitely felt like at the time one of the most ambitious games Nintendo has tried to make. But anyways, so for the gameplay. So in this game, you play as two variations of Link, a child and an adult version. You play the game for the first 3-ish hours as Child Link before you head to the adult form. They pretty much play identically, but with some different aspects here and there. Link can run around, use his shield and sword to attack enemies. They even added a brand new log feature. Since this is a 3D game, it helps with depth perception for a Zelda game. Link also has a great variety of equipment that you can use, like Deku Nuts that can use as a flashbang, and even basic stuff like using sticks to light up torches and such for puzzles. And you're going to need these equipments because over the new dungeons in this game, and these are heavily puzzled, and honestly they're really fun to go through. You have about 8 dungeons in this whole game. 3 of them you're playing as young Link, while the other 5 you're going to be playing as adult Link. For young Link, as I said earlier, you go through the Deku Tree to find a creature that's killing the tree. For the second area, you gotta stop this monster who is eating all the food for the Goons. And lastly, you need to find the Princess of the Zoras who's been eaten by this Belly of the Beast, who actually turns out that she usually goes here a lot, but then the beast suddenly gets sick. And as for the adult Link, you have 5 different dungeons you'll be going through. The first dungeon I went through is the Forest Temple. This one you have to find 4 different torches that was held captured by the ghost. And I'll be completely honest, I had a hard time finding through this because over the climbing mechanics and such, and there was this hidden chest that was hidden right outside the area. Honestly, a nice first impression of the adult dungeons, and honestly I really love the boss fight in this game. I like how he goes into the paintings in this area. The second one I went through is the Fire Temple. In order to get through the area, you're going to need to release the Gorons who have the keys to other doors in this area. This is also the area that has the special Goron hammer, which is honestly really satisfying to use. It's kind of slow, but it's really impactful when you actually hit someone with it. And the boss fight in this area is a freaking dragon, and this is honestly why I love the 3D Zelda games, because when they have a boss fight, it really leaves an impression. But anyway, for the next one we have the Water Temple. But before we do so, we need to go to the small ice cavern to collect a iron shoes, and also talk to the Zora King to get a blue tanuki. A blue tunic so Link can breathe underwater. And honestly, yeah, this temple sucks. Everything you hear about people describing the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time, they were right, because holy crap, this area is aimless for me. I soon got the hang of the area, but even then, it's just monotonous just going back and forth and going to the menus and such. The infamy for this temple is still earned to this very day. I cannot think of any other temple besides maybe the forest one. Even the boss fight in this area is pretty weak. You're supposed to grab him with the hook launcher, but it just doesn't work for me a lot of times. And also that Dark Pit boss fight was pretty annoying. It's a pretty cool concept on paper, but in execution it's eh. But yeah, definitely the weakest part of the game. The Shadow Temple is honestly the most creepiest one I can think of in this area. Okay, before you head to the area, you'll meet with Sheik, who gets yeeted by a ghost. You then transform into young Link to go underneath a well to find a special magnifying glass to infiltrate the Shadow's magic. And holy shit, this thing is terrifying. But as for the temple itself, it's honestly pretty solid. A good mix of puzzles here and there, and honestly really fun. And last but not least, the Spirit Temple. But before you do so, you need to help these carpenters who were captured by a bunch of Gerudos in order to get through the area. Once you get to the temple, you need to play as young Link so you can get a special gauntlet that Link can wear as an adult so he can carry heavy objects. Eventually, Link was able to find a special mirror shield that he can use to light up puzzles area. And as for the boss fight, it's honestly the most comical boss fight I've had in the game. Not because it's easy, but because the boss characters themselves are kind of funny. Like, once you defeat them, they start nagging at each other for dying. Honestly, that did give me a quick chuckle. And those were all the temples, and honestly, for their first ever 3D outings, they really knocked out of the park for most of them. However, the temples aren't the only ones you'll be traveling through, because there's also tons of side quests you can get through to get certain goodies that can help you with certain temples. The main optional collectible you can find throughout the entire game are heart containers. If you gather all 4 of them, you can raise your health point by 1. Although you can get a big heart container every time you beat a boss fight in this game to raise your health point by 1 automatically. You can also do certain missions in the area to upgrade your own equipment, like for example, you can carry a lot more bow and arrows if you do this little minigame right here. And the last major collectible you can find throughout the entire game are these golden skull things you can collect every time you defeat these special spiders. These are used to restore these people from the curse that turn them into these little spider mutant things, and honestly they're pretty terrifying. And lastly, you can get Epona, Link's iconic horse in this game. It's pretty easy, all you have to do is go to the Lon Lon Ranch, where you have to talk to this guy who will make you ride a horse for a few minutes, do it again, and you go through a horse race. Once you beat him, out of rage he decides to lock you up before you decide just to jump out of the area, and thus you get Epona. And honestly, Epona is a godsend because throughout the game you're going to be going through Hyrule Fields a lot, and it's a very spacious area, for better or for worse. The problem with this area is that since it's a very large area, it takes a while to walk on foot. I get it gives you a sense of like a big adventure, but replaying it a lot, it does kind of drag a bit, especially when you try to go all the way to different areas just on foot without Epona. All I can say is that thank God when you're traveling on foot with young Link, the areas you need to go by are very easy to get through and very quick, since, like, for example, as you get to the second area of the temple and defeat the monster there, you have to go to the Zoran area, which is luckily right next door of the Goron area in Hyrule Fields. Another problem I have with this game is kind of the dated jank this game has somewhat, because there's a lot of times when collision feels a bit weird. Like this one when I'm doing the second to last final boss, where for some reason I try to climb up to the area, but Link just certainly falls back down for some reason. But overall, I feel like the gameplay in this game is really strong throughout. And as for the presentation, well, this is when things get more mixed for me. I've gotta say, out of all the first-party Nintendo games out there, I think this one aged the worst graphically. On the N64 console, I think games like Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie aged better because of its aesthetic and style. And if we're comparing to games that released around the time as Ocarina at that time, then I think games like Crash Bandicoot Warped and Sonic Adventure aged better as well. However, I do not think everything visually in this game aged badly, because I think the cutscene aged really well, surprisingly. Especially one where they're trying to introduce a boss fight, where they have an intimidating presence throughout. Which is another thing I really like about this game, which is the lighting, because it's honestly really impressive for N64 standards. Because I can tell you, good lighting can really carry the graphics for a lot of games. And I think Ocarina of Time at some points really helped with the lighting. And as for the music, honestly I really enjoy the music in this game. It's honestly a beautiful melody. Especially with the main Ocarina themes where you're trying to warp to certain areas, they just have this very elegant presence. Oh yeah, the Ocarina, I should talk about this real quick. So throughout the game, you'll be using the Ocarina to solve certain puzzles, like pretty much using Zelda's melody, for example. But halfway through the game, you're mostly using this for convenient fast travel. And lastly about the presentation, I should talk about the character. And it's a bit brief. Honestly, there's really not that much to talk about, but they're pretty fun and charming in a lot of ways. I know people complain a lot about Link being a silent protagonist, but honestly I don't really mind about it. It kind of makes it a bit more interesting, because I always find the more silent protagonists a lot more interesting, like Crash Bandicoot or Mario. Ganondorf definitely has an intimidating presence that I really enjoy, and honestly this is my favorite incarnation of Ganondorf. He's just really intimidating when he has a presence, and he's very cunning too, tricking Link into opening the Temple of Time. And speaking of Link, he has seemed to attain the final medallions, so I think it's appropriate to wrap things up. So as Link attains all the medallions and sages, Sheik then appears in the Temple of Time. Before they head for the final battle, Sheik then explains more about the Triforce and what happened to it. So as Ganon tries to steal the Triforce, it ended up scattering into 3 different people, with Ganondorf so happened to have the Triforce of Power. With the other 2, one of them being the Triforce of Courage, ended up being inside of Link. And lastly, the Triforce of Wisdom is inside of Zelda, and that so happens to be Sheik. Zelda was in disguise the entire time, trying to hide from Ganondorf so she doesn't get captured. And then she got captured. Wah. So with no time to lose, Link heads off to Ganon's castle, which so happens to have a bridge thanks to the sages. Inside of Ganon's castle is 6 gauntlets you need to go through. They're essentially remixed versions of all the temples that Adult Link has been through. And with that, he has one final upgrade where he can raise a giant boulder from the ground and throw it in the air. But once you go through all the trials, you can face off Ganondorf once and for all. I just like how evil he acts when you meet him in his throne room. It really does give out the vibe that this is going to be the final battle. The first phase is pretty much a harder version of the Forest Temple boss, which makes sense because that was an evil clone of Ganondorf. You basically have to use the Master Sword to deflect the Thunderbolt to Ganondorf and stun him with the Light Arrow. Do this a few times and he goes down, and this is where you head to the countdown section where you need to run with Zelda to escape from the castle. There's some enemies you need to fight beforehand, and honestly I was a bit stressful to the countdown. I was literally seconds away from losing this timer. But anyways, so once the castle is down, Ganondorf has one final trick up his sleeve. And it's honestly the best final boss in a Zelda game. I love Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom because of its scope of the final boss, but this one just has a different vibe to it. Ganon just seems very threatening here, and it's all thanks to the lighting, which honestly I think this is the best looking area of the game. And honestly it's a really good challenge as well, because Ganon really puts up a really good fight. And I also like how the first part of this boss, you're taking away the Master Sword and have to use your items instead, which makes getting the Master Sword very satisfying, and it really feels like it's the final battle. This is definitely one of the best bosses in the entire series. And once you do the final blow, Ganondorf is defeated. Zelda then thanks Link for saving Hyrule, and to reward him, he is able to live the 7 years he has lost thanks to the coma. And that concludes The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and overall, I honestly had a really great time playing through this game again. There is some dated aspects for this game since it was on the N64, but even still, that really never bothered me from really enjoying the game. The exploration in this game is honestly really enjoyable, and you feel really rewarded once you get everything in the missions. Especially when you're trying to find all the heart containers, it is honestly really enjoyable to find the secrets in this game. If you're very curious on Zelda Ocarina of Time, I highly recommend it. Or you can play the other versions of this game.
For you, I traveled to the four corners of the world. I faced adversity. I became a hero.
Dad.
I saved your kingdom.
Dad.
Yes, Zelda?
Are you mixing me up with the princess again?
Hard to say. You're both pretty magical.
God, I just had to play that commercial. Robin Williams was such a national treasure. But yeah, in 2011, to promote the 3DS, Nintendo released a remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And I'll just cut some slack, this is honestly the definitive way to play through the game. It adds so much new quality of life features. The game feels a lot more polished and it looks great graphically. And if you don't own a 3DS, you can still play it on Switch, and it's still a really fun experience. Although for the 3DS remake, it includes a feature that was only exclusive to the GameCube port of Ocarina of Time called Master Quest. With the only thing different from the 3DS version is that everything is flipped instead of the original GameCube version, where it's just the same but with harder temples. But whether it's the 3DS remake or the N64 version, it doesn't really matter. It's honestly a game you should play at least once in your life. And I'd say this game still earns the legacy that it deserved. And speaking of N64 legacies, for the next video we're talking about another big classic Nintendo game. And this one is honestly my favorite game of all time, period. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye bye!